We need to talk. American deaths in Mexico continue to mount, and there is little the government can do about it. On Friday, March 3rd, 4 Americans were kidnapped at gunpoint when they drove their white minivan bearing North Carolina plates into the city of Matamoros. They crossed the Mexican border through Brownsville, Texas. It's just a 12-minute drive into Mexico from Brownsville. Shortly after the 4 crossed the border, gunmen who are suspected to be members of the Gulf Cartel opened fire on the group before pulling the 4 out of their vehicle and putting them into a white pickup truck. Images show that at least one of them was shot. We're going to get into it, but first be sure to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss out on updates to this story, trending topics, and so much more. Now let's get into it. Matamoros is one of the cities the U.S. warns not to go to because of so much violence and cartel activity. The U.S. State Department has a level 4 do not travel warning for this region because of high crime there. According to MSN.com, criminal groups target public and private passenger buses, as well as private automobiles traveling through Tamaulipas, often taking passengers and demanding ransom payments. So one can assume that if you are driving through there with American license plates, you will be targeted. This city has been controlled by the Gulf Cartel for nearly 100 years now. When I say controlled, I mean the cartel is the primary power there. They are not concerned about law enforcement or the military. Most of the law enforcement there have been bought off, and most of the security guards that work for the cartel come from the military. The city's primary source of income is from drug trafficking. The cartel owns and runs the state of Tamaulipas. They are even known for crossing the U.S. border and doing kidnappings in Brownsville, Texas. They are so brazen. The cartel is so powerful in Matamoros, they are not the least bit concerned about U.S. or Mexican law enforcement. That said, if you drive into the city with U.S. plates, you are likely to be a target. Unfortunately, this seems to have been the case for the 4 Americans who have been identified as Latavia McGee, Shaid Woodard, Zindell Brown, and Eric James Williams. As soon as they drove across the border, their vehicle was fired upon by the cartel. MSN.com reports that 2 of the 4 Americans were found deceased, and the 2 surviving Americans have since returned to the U.S., sending condolences to the families. It is typical in these cases for the cartel to demand multi-million-dollar ransoms in exchange for persons they kidnap. 3 days after the kidnapping, the FBI offered a $50,000 reward for the return of the 4 Americans and for the arrest of those involved. Mexican officials say it was a misunderstanding and it appears to be mistaken identity. They also say they have arrested a suspect in connection with the kidnapping. Jose Guadalupe was guarding the house where the cartel members held the 4 captive and tortured them. Do you see that? The 2 survivors are so blessed to be back on U.S. soil. As bad as this turned out, it could have been so much worse. President Biden had been informed of the situation and was watching it closely. The U.S. Attorney General Merrick Garland had also been briefed on the situation. As I mentioned a couple of weeks ago when I shared with you the U.S. travel advisory about Mexico, you can see it here. There is little that the government can do on your behalf in Mexico. If you find yourself or your loved one in an emergency situation there, it becomes a negotiation with a country that is rife with corruption. Their officials lie. They don't tell the truth as a normal course of business. It is the norm to not tell the truth when someone dies a violent death there. They do it to cover the deaths of their own citizens. What do you think they'll do when it comes to an outsider? And international media is involved. Now, they couldn't do it in this case. It was video recorded. It was so highly publicized. Not 1, but 4 Americans were involved. And it was so violent and out in the open and in broad daylight. Now, this is not to say that the U.S. always tells the truth either. But as Americans, we know better the devil we dance with here. If Shanquella's case has taught us anything, we know we cannot expect to be rescued in Mexico. In this case, we see that the FBI can act quickly and be highly visible when they deem it necessary. But the lack of consistency is evident. Please pay close attention to the travel advisory information and share it with everyone you love. This advisory information has been up since last year, before Shanquella's murder. And the media coverage about this increased before spring break. But many of us still have not gotten the message. Did you hear what I said earlier? These cartels usually demand multi-million-dollar ransoms, money that most of us don't have access to. They use your life as leverage for their agenda. And if you can't get the money they demand, they will further demand that you assist them in smuggling drugs into the U.S. The unfortunate thing is that law enforcement and the FBI partners, aka informants that are particularly located around the Matamoros border, are not reliable because of the danger that is involved in cooperating with law enforcement. That $50,000 that the FBI offered for the lives of 4 people is typically not enough for even one life. And if you want to fall for the narrative that Mexico is really doing something about this by arresting Jose Guadalupe, think again. If they even arrested him at all, he is merely a fall guy, a patsy. He was the guard at the house where they held the 4 Americans. What about those that actually did the harm? If the Mexican government knew where they were keeping the Americans, they know exactly who did this. And just like in the Shanquella Robinson case, the world is being fed a BS story, song and dance, to make it look like Mexico is handling this. Anything to make would-be tourists think they are on top of things and that this is a case of mistaken identity and that they can feel safe in Mexico. I said in the beginning of this video, the Gulf Cartel owns the state of Tamaulipas. They are the primary power there. Law enforcement and the military work for them. If you look back on my channel, you will see the many cases I've shared with you of not just Americans, but also Mexican citizens who have lost their lives there. And after months and even years of pleading with the US and Mexican governments, their families have gotten no justice. And in many cases, Mexico blamed the victim. I pray for the survivors and the families of the 4 victims in this case. But if we look at Mexico's track record, we can expect nothing more than impunity for their murderers. Maya Angelou said it best: if someone shows you who they are, believe them. Mexico has been showing us who they are. It's time we believe them. Please stay out of Mexico. It's just too dangerous. And be sure to check your travel advisory before making your next travel plans. And share this information with everyone you love. Shout out to all my sources: NBC News, MSN.com, LiveNow from Fox, CNN, Justice for Shanquella.